All right, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Come, Robert, take a chair, take a copy. And welcome to the first in a three-part series. We're going to unpack different passages from the Rebbe's Haggadah. There is commentary on the Haggadah. I don't want to elaborate on the nature of the Rebbe's Haggadah. I spoke about that a little bit in the little promotional video, which you may have seen. But essentially, the official title of this commentary is Haggadah Shel Pesach. It's the Haggadah of Pesach. Im Lekutei Taimim U'Minhagim, with a collection of reasons and customs. So the Rebbe, in his humility, refers to himself as a compiler, and it's sort of styled almost like he's just compiling. So there's a lot of notes, a lot of sources, a lot of citation. But the way the Rebbe stitches the citations together and the connective tissue, and sometimes the Rebbe adds his own commentary and his own things. When you put that into the context of the commentary and the sources the Rebbe cites to, it becomes, you see, unbelievably, the Rebbe's cutting scholarship. And I've said this a number of times, but the best way to describe this Haggadah is, and I hate the word, but it's the best word to describe it, academic. It doesn't get lost in extravagant pilpul back and forth. It doesn't get lost in that kind of thing. It doesn't get lost in deep meaning that's almost detached from the text. Whatever the Rebbe is going to comment is going to be in the words of the Haggadah. It's going to be straight to the point and absolutely precise. And every detail is covered. There's no part of the Haggadah that's extraneous to this kind of commentary. If your commentary is a halacha commentary, okay, so the parts of the Haggadah that are necessary for halacha, you comment on. If it's not in halacha, you gloss over it. If your commentary is linguistics, so that's what your focus is. But if your commentary is academically breaking down what does the Haggadah say, then whatever the Haggadah says is necessary. If the Haggadah is trying to convey something in a poetic form, you got to analyze the poetry. If the Haggadah is trying to convey something in the precise language, you got to address that. If it's a halachic issue, address that, and so on and so forth. So hopefully the plan is tonight we're going to look at a halachic piece, unpack some of the things the Rebbe talks about, and see really the beauty of what the Rebbe is trying to say, or what perhaps the Rebbe is trying to say. Tomorrow I'm going to try, or sorry, for next week, I'm going to try to find a passage that's linguistic, maybe historical, something of that nature, more of what Michael Chernick, Oliver Shalom, would call the sauce. And then perhaps the week after that, we'll try to find something more on the spiritual side, the kind of insights that people like to share at the Seder table, something of that nature. So maybe so that we can get a taste of the Rebbe's Haggadah. So the passage we're looking at today is in the opening statement of the Haggadah. Not mamish the opening statement, but the beginning of the retelling. So just by way of semi-introduction, so we know that in the night of the Seder, there's many mitzvahs we have to fulfill. Many mitzvahs. And you can put a whole list together of how many mitzvahs are biblical, how many are rabbinic, how many are customs. It's a fun thing that some of the scholars do, lists of how many mitzvahs we do. But the unique mitzvahs to the night, right, there's matzah, you have maror, you have the 4 cups of wine, some of those biblical, some of those rabbinic. And then you have the mitzvah to retell the story of the Exodus. That's the bulk of the text of the Haggadah. This is the fulfillment of the mitzvah to retell the story of the Exodus. And where is that mitzvah told to us in the Haggadah? Well, almost right at the beginning. Because you make Kiddush, it's the first thing you do. Because you're beginning the night, it's a Yom Tov meal, you make Kiddush, the first of the 4 cups. After you make Kiddush, you wash your hands, and the washing your hands is in preparation for dipping the first dip, the karpas, and that is only to get the curiosity of the children. That's the reason why you put that there. Why do you want curiosity of your children? Because you have to fulfill your mitzvah to relay the story of the Exodus. And that's supposed to be in response to your child's question. So you got to do something to make him ask. So right away you're dipping. Afterwards, you're breaking the middle matzah. That's another curiosity, right? It's another curiosity why we're breaking the matzah. We're saving it for later. And then once you make Kiddush, you have the curiosities down. You begin with the actual Haggadah. That's Magid. Right? This is Kaddish Orchas Karpas. Yachatz. Now we're Magid. Magid opens verse with an invitation to all the guests. Helach Manya. That's the opening paragraph. And then to the children's question, the Manashtana. But the story, the fulfillment of the mitzvah to tell the story begins with the paragraph right after the Manashtana, which is the paragraph of Avodah Bayinu. We were slaves in Egypt, answering the child's question. Yeah, this is the flow of the Haggadah up until this point. And in that paragraph, where we say we were slaves in Egypt, this is where we say that we have a mitzvah to retell the story. We're telling the child. This and this happened. And that's why we are here. We're telling the story. Yeah. So let's see how the Haggadah puts it. So I put it in Hebrew. We could read it in English. And I highlighted the section that we're going to be discussing. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God took us out from there. This is telling the child in answer to his questions. With a strong hand, with an outstretched arm. If the Holy One, blessed be, had not taken our fathers out of Egypt, then we, our children's children, would have remained enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Even if all of us were wise, all of us understanding, all of us knowing the Torah, it is still a mitzvah upon us to discuss the Exodus from Egypt. Here we go. And we're telling the child why we're here. And everyone discusses the Exodus from Egypt at length is praiseworthy. So that's what we're going to spend the night doing in response to your question, dear child. Yeah. So here we say, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. It's a mitzvah upon us to retell the story of the Exodus. So this is the first time the Haggadah uses this word of what the obligation we're fulfilling. Yeah. Actually, the translation said we would still be obligated, but I changed it to it is a mitzvah upon us, because what the Rebbe is going to be discussing is, well, what's this mitzvah? It's a mitzvah, right? So what is the mitzvah? Every mitzvah must have its classification. It must have a classification of what the fulfillment of that mitzvah looks like. That's what every mitzvah must have. It has its biblical parameters, it has its rabbinic parameters, and then it has the customary parameters. But what's the mitzvah? So this is what we're going to be discussing tonight. So let's look then at page 2, and we're going to read Rebbe's commentary. Now, Rebbe's commentary, as always is the case, Rebbe will have his commentary and then parentheses sources. Commentary, parentheses, sources. Commentary, parentheses, sources. And the commentary is sometimes very brief, 2 lines, and you have to really unpack all the commentary, all the sources, to know what he meant in his little brief commentary. So the first thing we're going to do is read through his commentary, skipping parentheses, just to get the flow of what he's trying to say. And then we'll unpack not all the parentheses, but some of them, to get a flavor for what the Rebbe is really trying to do. So even if we didn't do anything, all we did was just read through the commentary without the sources, we would still get some nice insight. But when we start unpacking the sources and the parentheses, we'll really get a real flavor for what they was trying to do in his commentary. Yeah? So you see where we're going? So let's begin. So we can see here, I read on the top of the page, number 2, Haggadah and Lakutei Tamim and Hagim, the Haggadah with collection of reasons and customs, which is the Rebbe's commentary. So the Haggadah read, Mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. It's a mitzvah upon us to retell the story of the Exodus. Now, in this bracket, in this parenthesis, the Rebbe puts all the sources for where it states that it's a mitzvah to tell the story of the Exodus on the night of the Seder. Gives all the sources there. I'm not sure why this publisher specifically decided to put some of the sources in bold and some in not bold. I have no idea. They're all the Rebbe's words. I have no idea what the meaning of the bold and not bold is. It's not the Rebbe's original decision to make it bold and not bold. It's the editor's choice here. I'm not sure why. The publisher's choice, I should say. I'm not sure why they did that. But whatever.
He's saying here Mechilta and Zohar.
Mm-hmm. These are all the sources. And in the middle, he puts a line there, but we're not going to be delving on this particular one. You'll see in a moment which one we're going to be delving on tonight. Okay, so there he tells us where the mitzvah is. The sources for where it's a mitzvah. Then he writes in the next paragraph, Af hanashim, women too, chayavos b'mitzvah zu are obligated in this mitzvah. And then parentheses with sources, which again we're going to skip. We're not going to revisit these sources, although this in of itself is a huge discussion, because we all know what's the principle when it comes to women and mitzvahs. Any mitzvah that is a positive commandment, time-bound, women are exempt. This would be an example of a positive commandment that's time-bound. Tell the story of the Exodus. It's a positive commandment. Thou shalt do. And it's time-bound. It's only for this night. So why are women obligated? So the Rebbe puts in the sources and the footnote, and that whole parentheses is a huge, big discussion on that. Different reasons and different levels. Is it biblical? Is it rabbinic? That the women are obligated, but we're not going to go down that route. We're just putting it out there. Comes the next paragraph. So we're skipping the parentheses again. So now we're in the third paragraph. Ve'ein mevorchen al mitzvah zu. We do not make a blessing over this mitzvah. Why not? Every mitzvah we do, we make a bracha before we perform the mitzvah. Blessed are you, God, our Lord, who has commanded us to put on tefillin, and then put it on. Blessed are you, God, our Lord, who has commanded us to wear tzitzis, put it on, and so on and so forth. We have a mitzvah we just established to retell the story of the Exodus. So how come we don't begin the Haggadah by saying, Blessed are you, God, our Lord, who has commanded us to retell the story of the Exodus?
No real action.
Yeah.
Because it bothered me, but I figured maybe with the answer.
So here it is.
It's kind of it's not a physical mitzvah.
So what's
an action? Meaning, every other mitzvah means you have to light candles physically. You have to put on tefillin physically. You have to eat kosher physically.
Oh, wait, 1 second. Let's think of one second. Let's think. Mitzvah of davening, of learning Torah. Every morning we make a bracha. You begin before you learn Torah, you have to make a bracha learning Torah. You cannot learn before you make that bracha. Right? It's not speech versus action. That wouldn't be a good marker. But
it's more chachma, it's in the head.
It's al divrei Torah on the speak, because you're in theory you could think Torah before you make that bracha, but you cannot speak the words of Torah before you make that bracha in the morning. Yeah? Okay. So let's see. So it says that the aim of Orchan mitzvah. Sorry? I'm sorry?
Learning Torah is also an action. Learning Torah.
The speech is an action.
Yeah.
The Gemara says, Akima svasav hava maisa. The movement of the lips constitutes an action. This is what the Gemara says.
The story is no different.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. So the distinction. That's right. So the distinction of speech versus action is not a good enough distinction. But let's see other distinctions. Sorry.
Every day it's not as good, so maybe it's.
We're going to get to that soon. 1 second. So it says the Rebbe, the aim of Orchan mitzvah is we don't make a blessing on this mitzvah. The kama time nemru b'davar is that. A number of reasons were said as to why we don't make a bracha on this mitzvah. Number 1, you've already fulfilled your obligation to make a bracha during Kiddush. In Kiddush, you're making a bracha. And in that blessing, you say, to remember the exodus from Egypt. Okay, so that blessing already covered that. Number 1. Number 2, you've already fulfilled your obligation during Shema. During the Shema, you make mention of Egypt. The third paragraph, Hayom Yom, is there because we're obligated every day to make a mention of Egypt. So the first paragraph of Shema, the first 2 paragraphs are the obligation. Hayom Yom is for the obligation to remember Egypt. So you already did that. And when you say Shema, you make a bracha before and after. And then afterwards you say Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. Those are brachas on Shema. Reason number 2. 1 is because you said it by Kiddush. Number 2, because you did it already in Shema. Number 3, this is similar to what you're saying, Jacob, because there's no measure to how much you have to do to fulfill the mitzvah. Even with the slightest amount of speech, you already fulfilled your obligation. So with Torah, it might be, when it comes to Torah, is a little different. It actually is qualified how much Torah you're obligated to learn. So at the minimum, it's Perek Echad Shachar, Perek Echad Avos. At the minimum, it's 1 chapter in the morning and 1 chapter in the evening. So there is a minimum requirement, depending on what your financial status is, depending on your level of learning. You have a different level of obligation for each person when it comes to Torah study. And there's a whole book the Alter Rebbe wrote called Hilchos Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study, that goes through this. But when it comes to the mentioning from Egypt, at what point did you fulfill your obligation? The second you say the word, I left Egypt, now I'm done. That's right. So the fact that we said before that anyone who elaborates is praiseworthy. But if I wasn't elaborate, I didn't fulfill the mitzvah. I did. So because the mitzvah doesn't have any measure, quantifiable measure as to where it begins and where it ends, no bracha. We're going to see, we're not done. Let's just get the whole picture. Huh? Sorry? Okay. That was number 3. Number 4. Because the entirety of the Haggadah itself is a bracha and praise. Ubefrat, and specifically, shetiknuba, it's been established in the Haggadah that we conclude the recitation of Haggadah, bebirchas asher galanu, we do make a bracha at the end of it. At the end of the Haggadah, before we drink the second cup, we make a bracha. Saying, that's right. The aim metaknim bracha la bracha. You don't make a bracha for a bracha. The classic example for this is benching. It's a biblical obligation to thank Hashem after you're done eating a meal. Biblical obligation. V'achalta, you eat, v'savata, you're satisfied, v'erachta, and you should bless. You don't make a bracha before you start benching to fulfill that mitzvah, because the mitzvah is a bracha. You make a bracha for a bracha. So in some ways, says the Rebbe, quoting, none of these things are original from the Rebbe, they're all sources. Even though, of course, if we look at the sources, I'm sure we can see the way the Rebbe phrases it, but they're not ostensibly the Rebbe's own answers, these answers. They're all from collection other places.
What's the thing with benching? What is
benching is a biblical commandment. It's a bracha, mitzvah. But you don't make a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, al berachas hamazon. We don't say, blessed are you, God, because the mitzvah itself is to make a bracha. And you don't make a bracha for a bracha. So says this answer, that Haggadah itself is a kind of bracha. It's a praise to Hashem. So you're like making a bracha for a bracha. Especially since the Haggadah itself concludes with a bracha. Asher galanu. Okay. Next answer. because you fulfill the mitzvah by interruption. You don't do it in one consecutive movement. You interrupt yourself during the mitzvah. How so? Eating and drinking, etc. Meaning to say, the Rebbe is arguing, at least according to this answer, that the second half of the Haggadah, Hallel, is also part of the mitzvah to tell the story of the Exodus. Which means you're doing the mitzvah of retelling the story, the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzchak in two shots. First at the beginning, and then you interrupt with a second cup, with a maror, with a matzah, with a whole meal, and then you go back to doing it. And anytime you do a mitzvah.
Learning is the same way. You learn, and you stop, and you go.
Oh, good question. Because the truth is, the chiyuv of learning is always. It's a big chiddush, by the way, about learning. When it comes to learning, the chiyuv of learning is 24/7. It just so happens you've been exempt for a certain while you have to do your business, whatever it is your business is, eating, drinking, whatever it is. Okay. Well, the example. 1 second. He gives you an example, a footnote for this example of this for mitzvah that interrupted. 1 second.
1 second, but the whole night is to mitzvah also to talk about using science. Just like learning, you could.
Between.
It's
Yeah.
the whole night you should be doing it. So
Good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know. It's a good question. We have to look at the sources. But we're not going to be unpacking this passage tonight. Okay. And Rebbe says this is similar to that which I've said with regard to the 4 cups of wine. Why don't we make a bracha? And if you remember, we spoke about this in years past.
Each one.
I can tell you. I can give the class again if you don't remember. We talked about this idea. Oh, you do remember?
Sure, yes.
Of course I remember.
Oh, do you remember? Good, Baruch Hashem. I have a big pilpul on this. Yeah. Why is it that we don't make a bracha? Blessed are you, God our Lord, who's commanded us to drink 4 cups of wine? Because the mitzvahs are done in separation from each other. What that means, maybe the doctor here remembers from last year, from 3 years ago. Okay, but time and other reasons. Okay, now that it gets to the beef of what we're going to be discussing tonight, is the next paragraph. Now, so first we established that's a mitzvah, sources. Then we established women also have the mitzvah, parentheses, sources. Now we established why it is we don't make a bracha. 4 different reasons, and the Rebbe says there are other reasons. Now, comes the Rebbe and says, and here comes the bulk of what we're going to be looking at tonight. Even though, again, we're skipping parentheses for now. We're going to come back to them, but for now we're skipping parentheses. Even though it is an obligation to remember and to make mention of the Exodus every single night and every single day. Meaning like this. There was alluding to the fact that there are opinions in the Gemara that we're only obligated. We actually say it in Haggadah. We discuss this dispute in the Haggadah. We quote that Gemara, which says there's a dispute. The mitzvah to make mention of Mitzrayim every day, is it only by day or by night? Ben Zoma said also by night, right? So if the mitzvah every day, if the daily mitzvah of remembering Mitzrayim is only by day, but not by night, then what makes the night of the Seder unique? That it's at night. Because every day is by day only, not at night. But because we rule, like Ben Zoma, that it's every day and every night, so last night I mentioned Mitzrayim, tonight I mentioned Mitzrayim when I said Bayomer, tomorrow I'm going to, and then Seder night also. So what makes the mitzvah of the Seder night different? Yeah. So skip parentheses. Parentheses is where he says the sources that we have to we make mention of Mitzrayim every day. So what's the difference? What makes the night of the Seder unique?
Make mention or remember Mitzrayim.
We'll get into it. We'll get into that. We're going to get into that. But at least ostensibly we're saying it about Yomer, so we're mentioning it, right? We're actually saying the words. It's Mitzrayim. Yeah. So what makes the night of the Seder different? Says the Rebbe, Yesh techalik b'neihem. We can make a distinction between the mitzvahs every day remembering and the night they're remembering, and the unique mitzvah of remembering on the night of the Seder. The gam deraisa, and even biblical, or I shouldn't say even. Direct translation is and also biblical. I'm not sure, I just want to put it out there right now. I don't know what that means. And also biblical. He can mean one of 2 things. Because he's going to give now 6 distinctions between the daily mitzvah to mention Egypt, to mention the Exodus, and the Seder mention of Exodus. He's going to give 6. So when the Rebbe says here, and also biblical, does he mean all 6 of them are also biblical? Or does he mean amongst them I also have biblical ones? But some of them might be rabbinic distinctions. What does that mean here?
Sounds like the latter.
Okay, so
There's some rabbanims that we have to say in brachas, or we have to say in tefillas, remembering Mitzrayim.
So, okay,
Yeah.
I can see both. And when we go through, I'm going to point out some things that might indicate one way or the other. That's the first thing I want to keep in mind. Are all of them also deraisa? or only some of them?
Only talking about
The word gam and also. Does he mean that these are also biblical? Right. So that means all the. So does the Rebbe mean to say that all the 6 reasons and all the 6 distinctions that I'm about to give, they're all biblical? Or amongst them, there are some that are biblical. But some might be rabbinic distinctions. Let's see. The Rebbe is going to give now 6 distinctions between the mitzvah to make mention of Mitzrayim every day and the mitzvah to retell the story at the night of the Seder. The Rebbe is going to give 6 distinctions. Of those 6, are all of them biblical distinctions? Or some of them biblical distinctions? What does he mean with this word gam?
You have to just say this. This is also with the
Let's read the distinction.
So I'm just putting it out there. Another thing to say. Sorry. Okay, so it's not 100% clear, which is why I'm going to point that out as we go along. Okay, let's see. What? What do you mean Shema? Well, the Shema is the mitzvah, right? So maybe the night of the Seder, the biblical mitzvah is just to say Shema, like every other night. What makes it different? Whereas the mitzvah is different. The fact that, in other words, like this, the fact that we go ahead and make a whole Seder out of it doesn't make the mitzvah in its essence different. That could be custom that came later. It could be rabbinics, because the night is the actual night when it happened, so the sages say make a bigger fuss out of it. Right? But maybe at the biblical level, all I have to do is read Shema. And in fact, it seemed like before we did, one of the answers for why we don't make a bracha what was one of the answers for why we don't make a bracha for the Haggadah? Because you said it by Shema, which means I already did my obligation to retell the story in Shema, which means it's no different than any other night. Rabbinically we add, by custom we add, the sages said to add, but biblically speaking, what's the difference between these mitzvahs?
One is us saying it alone.
Okay, you're suggesting answers. We're going to get to answers, but let's just understand the question first. It's all going to be in the answers. Let's just see them, right? So again, this is the distinction we're talking about. What's the difference between Shema, at the core level, the obligation to mention Egypt we say every night at Shema, that mitzvah, and the mitzvah we do elaborately at the Seder? Is there any difference between those mitzvahs other than the fact that we happen to do it elaborately at the Seder? Or at the core level, the obligation of the mitzvah is itself different? Let's see. Yeah. Yeah.
Laraisa, what's the obligation in the case of night Seder?
That's the question right now.
That's it. So basically, is the Haggadah about part of the not the whole
That's the
thing?
question.
Clearly,
What is the biblical mandate?
What's the mandate is to eat matzah more. Tell
Okay,
the story.
good.
Speak
So
you.
let's
That's
one
it.
second. So what exactly? How do you define that commandment? Tell the story. How do you define that? Right? Every mitzvah has to have a definition, and you have to remember the text of the Haggadah is not a biblical obligation.
That's right.
Because the text of the Haggadah, as if you remember, also a couple of years back, we talked about the history of the Haggadah, and I very much recommend watching this year. It's a 30-minute class. It's on YouTube, where I explain the history of the Haggadah and where it was written, how it was written, how it came about. It's important to understand it if you truly want to understand the Haggadah. Right? The Haggadah emerged over time.
Right.
Because it's like prayer, davening. The essential mitzvah is what? When you need something, ask God. That's the essential mitzvah. Not to read the Siddur. Our sages came along and said, okay, you want to fulfill the mitzvah in the optimal way, here are the words to do it. It's the same thing with the Haggadah. So you can't say that the mitzvah is read the Haggadah. That's not the definition of the biblical mitzvah. So what's the definition of the biblical mitzvah? Distinguishing that mitzvah from the mitzvah to make mention of Mitzrayim every night, which I fulfill by saying Hayom Yom in Shema, the third paragraph of Shema.
It has to be not after Marv, because Krishma you don't say Hayom Yom, and Marv is not Mechuyev because it's still daven. So
you would, back in the old day, you would have said Shema without davening. You would have said Shema anyway.
all right,
So
Hayom
it's a-
Yom on the Leil Shmuel, there's no Hayom Yom, so it has to be daven.
So you say Hayom Yom. What do you mean? When you daven Ma'ariv on Pesach night, you don't say Shema. No, you fulfill the mitzvah by the Shema you say at Ma'ariv. Yes. Yeah.
So
Okay, it's a problem. Yeah.
and they're missing the whole thing here. So kid,
So maybe all they have to do is say Shema. Yeah. Okay, so the Rebbe now is going to give us 6 distinctions between the mitzvah to remember Mitzrayim every night and the mitzvah to tell the story at the night of the Exodus. And the Rebbe writes that these distinctions are also biblical. When he says those words, also biblical, does he mean that all 6 of them are going to be biblical? Or does he mean amongst these 6, some are going to be biblical and some will be rabbinic distinctions? It's question 1 to bear in mind, which we'll point out as we go along. Question 2 to bear in mind is the Rebbe maintaining that all 6 of these distinctions are true? So it's 6 different distinctions? Or are some of these distinctions mutually exclusive? So it's 1 of these 6, or 2 out of the 6, or 3 out of the 6, depending on which opinion you are. Or is the Rebbe maintaining all 6 of these are actual distinctions? And these are the 6 things that come together to make the actual mitzvah. Is that what the Rebbe is arguing? Keep both of these in mind. As we go along, I'm going to point out different ways to read to read this. Okay, so let's go through it. Again, we're skipping the parentheses. Are we clear on where we're going?
Mhm.
Yeah? Okay, Aleph, distinction number 1. To bechol yoim, every day, biblically speaking, yoytze, you fulfill your obligation, gam beschira belev, only by remembering the Exodus in your heart. Top of the second column. Ubi iyun ba'alma, and just in thinking.
There's gam is here. Not
Sorry?
gam means only or with.
Even, or gam also, meaning you don't need to. Meaning you don't need to say it. You don't need to verbalize it. You just have to think Egypt. That's enough. Skip parentheses. So you're going. It's hard to skip the parentheses here, but if you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down, after it says Masha'en Kain, but this is not the case. Belil Pesach, on the night of the Seder, Shenemar, when the verse says, tell your child. Harei hadiburu dafka. The speech, the verbalization is specific. So this. 1 second, but the point is we got to say. But let's pause that for a second. Put a pin in that. Yes. I have a lot to cover, but we're going to get to it. Yes. So let's make this clear. There is saying like this. Distinction number 1 is, and this is definitely a biblical distinction, because rabbinically speaking, certainly you have to verbalize the words of Egypt every night, which is why you got to verbalize the passage of Hayom Yom. But biblically speaking, says the Rebbe, every day all you have to do is think about Mitzrayim, and the night of the Seder you have to verbalize it, because the verse says, "V'higadata," and you shall say. This set of sources we're really going to unpack tonight. I hope when we have time, we'll really unpack it so we'll get a true understanding of it. Okay, distinction number 1. Distinction number 2, where it says the behest there. B'chol yom, every day, dai b'schira ba'alma. It's enough just to make mention of it. Ukolashna Mishnah, and indeed this is the language of the Mishnah. Uberambam, and in the Maimonides code, mitzvah lahasker yitzis Mitzrayim. It's a mitzvah to make mention of Egypt, the Exodus.
That's every day.
To remember, but lahasker has 2 translations: to remember or to make mention. Yeah. So let's just for the sake of this one, we'll say mention. Masha'en came at Pesach, but when it comes to Pesach, shetzorach liyoi sipur, there must be a story. So there's distinction number 2. Every day mention, because if you go in Vayomer, the paragraph of Vayomer, the 3rd paragraph of Shema, which is where we fulfill our daily obligation to make mention of Egypt. How much of Egypt do you mention there? Most of the chapter talks about Sichos. But at the end you say, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God your Lord, Asher Tesicha, who took you Me'eretz Mitzrayim out of Egypt, at Yos Lechem Lakim, to be for you a God, and that's the end of our fulfillment of our obligation. All we do is make mention. We left Egypt, that's all. But the night of the Seder, the pasuk, we'll unpack the sources, a little bit of the sources here too as well. The halacha is you have to make mention, sipur, you have to relate the story. Sorry, not just make mention, but to relate the story. So there's a distinction number 1. Number 2, is this distinction different than the one before? Are they mutually exclusive, or are they building on each other? Meaning the first distinction said, according to distinction number 1, what's the biblical commandment every single day? Is to think. Mm-hmm. According to distinction number 2, what's the biblical commandment every single day? To say. Which means we can't maintain all answers. At least not these 2 together. Unless we're going to argue that in distinction number 1, where he says that biblically speaking, where he says all you have to do is think about Egypt, rabbinically you have to say. And comes along distinction number 2 to say that even rabbinically there's a better part of the night Seder because you have to tell the whole story. So if you want to keep both of them, then they can't both be biblical. And if you want to say they're both biblical, you can't keep both of them. That's why I was saying I'm a little bit stuck in what the translation of those words, gam that I said. You follow this? Follow that? Yeah. So just again quickly. So distinction number 1, actually go to the bottom of the page. Bottom of page 3, you'll see a chart. Yeah, so it's easy to see. We only did the first 2, right? So daily, on the bottom of page 3. Daily is in thought only, and Seder night in speech. Daily, distinction number 2 is daily is mention. Mention what? Verbally. Whereas Seder night is full story, which means number 1 on daily and number 2 on daily are a contradiction. According to number 1, daily mitzvah is to think about it. According to number 2, daily mitzvah is to actually verbalize it. It's a different biblical mitzvah.
So what's wrong with having them both there?
It's not a problem. What I'm saying is, but if you want to make, if I were to argue, if I'm going to argue that we never list these 6 reasons, never telling you that all these 6 reasons are true, then what's the mitzvah? What's the daily mitzvah? To remember or to speak? Because the first and second ones we define differently. The only way to maintain all of them is if I said like this, that in distinction number one, where the Rebbe said that the mitzvah is to think the Exodus, that was biblical. So biblically speaking, think Exodus daily. Biblically speaking, make mention of the Exodus Seder night. Comes distinction number two and says, rabbinically speaking, make mention every day in words, and rabbinically speaking, in addition to making mention, which is a biblical commandment, also do verbalization. That's the only way to maintain both number one and number two. If the second one is rabbinic, but then that would mean when the Rebbe said that these six gamma that I said is also biblical, he didn't mean all of them are biblical, he meant some of them are biblical. So that's what I'm saying. If you want to say that all six are biblical, then you can't maintain all six, at least not the first two. The only way to do that is to say if the first is biblical, the second is rabbinic. That's how it would seem to me. Anyway, stop pointing out. Okay, was it clear or not? If it wasn't clear, it's okay. We'll go forward. Okay, so let's go back. Is that clear or not so much? Yeah?
It's only just to say it.
No, it's clear, Rabbi.
Yeah, okay. So let's go to number 3 then. We're on page 2 again. Distinction number 3, where it says the big gimel on the left-hand column of page 2. Right? Page 2 I'm looking at? Yeah. On the left-hand column, big gimel. Yeah. Yesh mefarshim, there are those who want to say, this is the only one, this is another thing just to point out, this is the only of the 6 distinctions where the Rebbe begins by saying, Yesh mefarshim, there are those commentaries. Every other time he just said, the first times he said, daily this, night of the Seder this. When it comes to here, he says, there are some commentaries that want to say, why does he phrase it like that? Maybe when we pack the sources, we'll get an answer to that.
Like not everyone holds it.
Huh?
Not everyone holds it.
Not everyone holds the other ones either. Every single one has disputants, except for the last 2 are completely the Rebbe's novel ideas, where over there's no disputants because it's the Rebbe's original thought. But every other one, the Rebbe quotes disputants also. Okay, so Yesh Mefarshim are those those commentaries who say Shebe Pesach, that on the night of the Seder, Noisif, there's an addition. See, this is another interesting phrase. There are some commentators that say that on Pesach there's an addition. In addition to what? In addition to whatever you have to do, in addition to what you have to do every single day, there's another addition. Or is he saying, in addition to what I said till now about mentioning, about verbalizing, about mentioning, right? About verbalizing and about retelling the story, there's another addition. Meaning, is he saying now in addition to the first 2? Or is he saying in addition to the daily? It could be both, just pointing out.
To the daily, that's what we're talking about.
Maybe. Let's see. Huh? So this is shetzarach loymar, that it must be said b'derech tshuva in response lebein to a child or la'acher to another. Distinction number 3. Every day when you make mention of Egypt, you do it alone. Night of the Seder, you have to have another person there. So why would you phrase it as an addition? There are those commentators who say that in addition, you also have to say it to someone else. In addition to what? I think it means, if you ask me, I think it means, in addition to what I said before, that there's a distinction that you have to actually retell the story and not just mention it. That story must be relayed in question form.
Who else would you be telling it to?
Yes,
The whole point of the commandment to tell
Not
the
so
story
simple.
is to tell
Not so simple.
yourself.
Not so simple. We're going to learn soon. It could be telling yourself. We'll get it.
Just by yourself.
We'll get to.
I think so.
Jacob, not so simple.
Absolutely.
Not so simple.
You would think you need
You guys are all right and not so simple. I hope we have time to get through all these sources because these are all good points and these are all right and it's all going to come up. We're going to cover all of this. Okay. Huh? Yeah. So in addition, I think that it means like this. There are those commentaries that say, in addition, everybody agrees of the 2 past distinctions. Everybody agrees that on the Seder night you have to mention it, and everybody agrees that the Seder night you have to tell the story. And then there are commentators that say that in addition to that, you also have to have another person there. And that's what I think that means here. Not in addition to the daily. Because it's such a leap. You're going from mention daily to saying a story to someone who asked you a question on nightly, and that's what you're calling an addition. I think that's why he introduces it as Yesh Mefarshim. Because the other things, everybody agrees that the night of the Seder you have to tell the story and not just mention it, and certainly not just think about it. But there are those who say that in addition to all that, you actually have to say it to someone else.
You don't have to
follow. That's what I think that means here. And then when we unpack the sources here, we're going to answer your question, and hopefully see more why I think this is the case.
Where does
Okay.
the parentheses end?
It ends on page 3 on the top, by Dalet.
Okay.
Number 4. That top page 3, distinction number 4. Sipur, yeah. I tried to get them as big as I can with the Kudus, and I tried to get English wherever I could. I could not find the English translation of Haggadah. But anyway, okay. Number 4. Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim de Pesach. The fact that you have to make mention, the fact that you have to retell the story of Egypt on the night of the Seder. So here it doesn't say Yesh Mefarshim, there are some Mefarshim. It doesn't say that. It just says fact. There are some, not there are some, it just says the story, the mitzvah to retell the story on the night of the Seder. Nimna is listed, Beminyan HaMitzvahs, in the list of 613 mitzvahs, Ukaniska Le'il is mentioned above. Mentioned above meaning in the opening statement. When he had the first parentheses, where he put the sources for the mitzvah to say the night of the Seder, over there you'll see that many of them include it in their list of mitzvahs. Make clear what this means.
Is it in Rambam's list?
Yes, it's in Rambam's list. There are obligations that Jews have that can even be biblical, that aren't necessarily part of the 613 distinct mitzvahs. Their inferences that Torah wants us to do certain things. So they become an obligation, but they don't become necessarily one of the 613. And there's halachic application, which we'll get to hopefully when we unpack the sources. So skip the parentheses where he says, Masha enkein. Skip the parentheses. So you go down to the line which begins with the word ma. Masha enkein, but by distinction, has chira d'chol yom, the remembering of the Exodus every day is not listed as one of the 613. It just happens to be a biblical obligation, but it's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. The nafkamina ladina, and there's even practical ramification to that. The basic practical ramification is I do not want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but just to make it briefly to understand what we're talking about. The halacha is you cannot make a vow against that which the Torah tells you. I vow not to put on tefillin tomorrow. The vow is null and void, and you put on tefillin tomorrow morning. But if you make what's called a shvua koilo, which means you say I'm never going to eat matzah. So I'm not vowing against the Seder night. I'm vowing against matzah. It happens to also include the Seder night. Then the vow takes effect. But that rule, the requirement to use a vow that's a koilo, that's an incorporative vow, is only when the item is an actual one of the 613 mitzvahs. If it's not one of the actual 613 mitzvahs, I don't need that kind of vow to take me out of the obligation. So that's one of the distinctions in Allah. If it's one of the 613 or not one of the 613. So let's take this one for a second, yeah? Would you say right now that this answer number 4 is different than the other ones, to the exclusion of the other ones? Meaning to say, even if you want to argue that the big mitzvah on the night of the Seder is not to retell, and not to tell it to anybody else. The essential mitzvah is just to make mention in a few words, just like every other night. The difference is if it's part of the 613 or not part of the 613. Is that what they mean here? I don't think so. I think that means everything I just told you above, which is not just in your thoughts, you have to speak it. And not just speak it, you have to tell the story. And not just tell the story, some people say you have to actually tell it to someone else. In addition to that, this whole thing is a unique 613 mitzvahs, and the other one, and the mentioning of the daily is not. That's what I think he means.
You would call it 614 for argument's sake?
If the other ones were an actual mitzvah.
No, all the 613 are mitzvahs. We know.
Yeah.
This is an additional. This is now.
It's a biblical obligation, not a mitzvah in itself. That's all. I'm trying to think of another example like that where there's obligation. Actually, all the 6 remembrances.
Yeah.
We read every day. It's not a biblical. It's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. Remember the story of Miriam.
Amalek.
Amalek is a different story, but that we fulfill. We fulfill that. We fulfill when we read the Torah before Porter, right? Not the daily.
But the entire Seder is within it to begin with. So
Right, but this is different. This is a biblical obligation that isn't classified as one of the 613. It has its own rubric. So that what?
I didn't know. It's a derisive. This
Yeah,
whole thing.
yeah.
Remember?
It's
Okay.
because the
But it's
pasuk.
not in the
When we do
613.
one second, when we do the remembering, we read verses
Yes.
which say, "Thou shalt remember." Is that a part of the 613?
Okay. So it's that.
Okay. In this case, you want to know why? It says like this because what's the verse we quote every day? You have a siddur in there. Take out a siddur. Oh, what does the mantiska mean? In order to remember. It doesn't say "Thou shalt remember." It says in order that you should remember every day. Meaning the Torah is telling you you should have be remembering, but it doesn't say "Thou shalt remember." But for the night of the Seder, it says "Thou shalt tell thy child." Exactly. So it's not one of the 613, even though it's a biblical obligation. Clear? Yes, so we say right? Lamantiska to write the first one. So that you remember. Not thou shalt remember. So the inference of the verse is you have to remember, but not that thou shalt remember. Okay, this is not such a simple question because the question is what does the Rambam quote when he, whatever, we're not going down that
So
hole.
why isn't it part of the 613?
Sorry?
Why isn't it part of the 613?
Because the Torah doesn't say thou shalt. If you want to take that reasoning. There's other reasonings, but let's just say that. Because the Torah just says, so that you should be remembered all your days of your life. But not thou shalt. Right? Like for example, we're going to see this come up soon. Okay, we'll get there.
So much.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I don't know if we'll do this all. Okay. Hey, distinction number 5. Zechira dechal yoim, the daily remembrance, eina liyamoisa Mashiach, l'das ben zoma. In the Haggadah, besides for the dispute that we mentioned earlier, the dispute as to whether or not the daily remembering is by day or also by night, and we rule it's also by night, which is why we're trying to find a distinction from that as Seder, right? But there's also a dispute, will we have an obligation every day to remember Exodus when Mashiach comes? Will we have that obligation? And there's machlokes there, Ben Zoma and the Chachamim. Now it says there have been Ulakama Poskim, there are a number of halachic decisors, halacha kamoisoi, the law followed Ben Zoma. So there's another distinction. The night of the Seder, the obligation to retell the story will continue when Mashiach comes. The daily obligation to say Vayomer will not, according to Ben Zoma. Now again, you think this is
Does it say anything in the Talmud?
Huh?
Does it say anything in the Gemara
about who the halacha is?
about whether we're supposed to do this?
It says a dispute.
Oh, it says there's
A dispute. And they're saying that there are many halachic decisors that actually rule that you're supposed to follow Ben Zoma, who is the one who says that we will remember it when Mashiach comes. Every day. We won't remember it when Mashiach comes every day. We'll only remember it on Seder night when Mashiach comes. And there's another distinction. Seder night obligation goes into the Messianic era. Daily obligation to remember Egypt does not go into the Messianic era, according to Ben Zoma,
So we don't
which many people follow Ben Zoma.
recite the third paragraph.
We won't be obligated to recite the third paragraph of Shema, according to Ben Zoma, when Mashiach comes. We probably will anyway, but you may not have the obligation as Ben Zoma, or in Ben Zoma's view. Okay. This is the Rebbe, this second to last answer, and the last one, the Rebbe doesn't have any sources for those answers. They're his own original answers. Okay. Now, original answer, the 6th answer, the Leil Pesach, the night of the Seder, ha-mitzvahi, the mitzvah is, b'meshach kol halayla, all night. Here we will do the parentheses, oyat chatzos, or till midnight, l'Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah, according to Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah. Meaning, av shekvar sipper b'tchilas halayla, even if you already told the story, so you told the story as for all the obligations mentioned above. You didn't just think about it, you mentioned it. You didn't just mention it, you told the story. You didn't just tell the story, you told it to somebody else. Yeah? So you're done already. And now it's only 9 o'clock. Just another 6 hours to the night. Says the Rebbe, the obligation still stays upon you. Keep on telling the story. It's not just Kol HaMarba, but it's Kol HaLayla. It's Kol HaLayla. You have to go all night. Now, she'enkein b'chol yom, this is not the case every day. If you mention the Exodus once in Vayomer, lo matzinu mitzvah, we don't find an obligation, gam d'Rabbanan, even rabbinically. The Rebbe is taking into consideration rabbinic distinction. Right? Even rabbinically, daily, we don't find any obligation that once you finish saying Vayomer, you have to keep on talking about Egypt. Lahasker oy to mention any more. But to say that we... Okay, we don't have no obligation. We fine, but we only it's not an obligation though. We don't have any text like the text says anyone who adds is let's just do that text, right? Kol HaMarba is a meshubach. Anyone who adds what's the lashon Haggadah? Mitzvah l'saper Kol HaMarba is a meshubach. Whoever, and then the next story is Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shmuel, the story of the guy who sat all night. Meaning there is an obligation to sit all night, but we don't find it anywhere else. That never puts in parentheses even rabbinically, which means this distinction could be rabbinic. It could be that biblically speaking, all you have to do is retell the story once. But rabbinically, the mitzvah keeps on going all night. But then they will conclude by saying, "Adayin tzarich iyun," I still have to investigate, which means Rebbe still has certain things that are questionable. When Rebbe says certain things are questionable, what does that mean? Does that mean my entire first question about what the difference between the Seder night, never the other, that's still under question? Or does that mean just this last discussion is under question?
Yes.
I think that means just this last discussion. You could make the only reason to make the argument that all of them are under question is because every single one of the distinctions, okay, the last two are there was original, and the first four that were collected from other sources. The first four that I collected from other sources, every single one of them have opinions that disagree with them. And the last two are their own sources. So maybe that's why they were saying, I'm still not sure, because I haven't found a definitive. Maybe. But more likely that you're saying, Yossi, that means the last one. Why is that the case? Because people finish the Seder night at 11 o'clock. You can, in theory, finish by 10, 11 o'clock. And there's nowhere written in Haggadah, you have a mitzvah now to keep on going. The only mitzvah maybe where it says is the fact that it says, anyone who adds, this is praiseworthy. But it's not as if it says somewhere, don't go to sleep, your obligation is to go all night.
It doesn't tell you.
It doesn't say anywhere. Maybe that's,
It doesn't say
exactly.
tomorrow.
And maybe that's what it means, adayin tzarech iyun. Because otherwise, if this is the mitzvah is to go all night, or even if it was a rabbinic mitzvah, then it would say somewhere, try to stay up all night and say that and say more stories of Exodus. And we don't see that anywhere. So maybe that's what that means by we still need investigation.
I've actually heard under Rabbi that you have to finish by a certain time.
That's for eating the matzah, not for telling the story. That's for eating matzah. Okay, so now we have the Rebbe's actual commentary. Let's start unpacking the sources. Okay, so you can keep on referring back to the table on the bottom of page 3, so you can see it clearly, the distinctions, right? You can see progressively. See, the order makes, the Rebbe puts it in specifically in this order because it's progressive, as you can see. Number one, it's not just in thought, it's in speech. Not just in speech, it's full story. Not just full story, but with another person, at least according to some commentaries. Not just that it's an obligation biblically, but actually one of the 613. And not just 613 today, but can continue when Mashiach comes. And not just to do it and go to sleep, but you got to keep on going all night. So you can see it's progressive, right? Which is why I think they build on each other. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Yeah? So we can keep on referring back to the table. Okay, so now go to page 4. Okay, we're going to skip page 4 actually, because we don't have time. Unfortunately, we don't have time, but I just want to tell you what I did here in page 4. Maybe if we have time, we'll come back to it. But just something mind-blowing that hit me. The Rebbe in the source, in the footnotes, in the parentheses, cites numerous sources. So there's six reasons. 2 of them I said, the last 2 were from the Rebbe's original. The first 4, the Rebbe collects from other places. Yeah? In those 4, where the Rebbe collects from other places, there's one commentary, the Minchas Chinuch, that appears in the sources in all 4 of them. But sometimes the Rebbe just says Minchas Chinuch as a source, and sometimes he says, see the Minchas Chinuch. He adds that word, re'eh, see. Why sometimes add the word see, and sometimes just put the word Minchas Chinuch? So I looked it up, read through the whole thing, and I saw like this. Whenever the Rebbe says, see the Minchas Chinuch, if you look it up, you'll see it's because the Minchas Chinuch quotes that answer, but then questions it. And whenever the Rebbe puts the word Minchas Chinuch without saying see, he quotes that as a definitive answer. So in other words, if he's giving Minchas Chinuch as a source, he just says the words, Minchas Chinuch. But if he's telling you, see the Minchas Chinuch, what he means is, see there, you'll see an answer, but it's but. So he adds the word A, see. Look it up, you'll see. And I'll show you another one soon, where the Rebbe uses the word ayin, not just the A. Ayin means investigate. And we're going to see that text is really ambiguous and requires a whole investigation to figure out what's going on there. So Mahrash still, every down to the word is Mahrash precise in every language. We don't have time to do it, but I would show you, you could see. So what I did in the text there, if you can read Hebrew, is I put 1, 2, and 3, identifying where he gives answer number 1, where he gives answer number 2, and where he gives answer number 3. And then I put those 3 arrows in the middle, of Minchas Chinuch to tell you where he rejects. So you can see where the answer are and where the rejection is. And wherever the Rebbe says, A, go see, there's a rejection.
Maybe
it's unbelievable. It's mamish meduyak, push it perfect. Okay, just it's something that I thought was mind-blowing, so I wanted to share it, but we don't have time to go through all that. Yeah? What do you want to say?
Maybe this, the Re'eh Minchas Chinuch ties into the previous Tzarech Iyun.
That's what I was saying. So maybe the Tzarech Iyun is because all these things are become questionable. But I think it's more like what Yossi said. I'm firmly of the view that the Rebbe is speaking here definitively and not simply as a collector. And the reason why I believe that is because there are some things that Rebbe leaves out. I'll point out one thing. For example, when we get there, I'll point something out. In the list of answers for why we don't make a bracha, right? In the list of answers for why we don't make a bracha before the Haggadah, the Rebbe omits an answer that is found in a source that he quotes in the very next discussion about what the difference between the nightly remembrance and the Pesach remembrance. One of the sources that he mentions in the difference between the Seder night and the nightly remembrance, that source actually answers the question why we don't make a bracha, but the Rebbe omits that source. So it seemed to me that Rebbe is collecting the sources that he wants to say definitively that this is the right way. So I think the Rebbe is speaking definitively. This is the way to think about it. And I'm going to give you another proof soon for that as well.
Because otherwise he would have put that in the,
Exactly. If you're just collecting, you would have put that answer because he just quoted it 2 minutes later.
you see his way of thinking.
Exactly. But the whole Haggadah is packages. Like, I'm just a compiler. But then when you start to unpack it, there was not a compiler. There was a commentator giving analysis in very brief ways. Okay, so let's see. So let's look at page. Okay, this is, I have which one we'll do. Okay, now let's go to page. Let's go to page. Skipping a little bit. Maybe another time we'll do this.
We have another 2 lectures.
Okay, I want to get other things. Maybe we'll come back to it. Let's go to page. Let's go to page 8. A little history, Chabad history. Some people like Chabad history.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Actually, this is interesting. Let's do the page 8. Okay, so the other pages I unpack reason number 1, and it's very beautiful. And maybe another time we'll do it. Okay, so reason number 2 was on top of page 8. I requoted there that every day, b'chol yom, every day, behest ba'alma. It's enough to simply make mention. The Mishnah is the language of the Mishnah is. Uva Rambam and the language of the Rambam. Mitzvah lahaskei tzis b'tzrayim. It's an obligation to make mention of the Exodus from Egypt. Mashenkin b'Pesach, but on Pesach, shetzorach liyasipor, we have to relay the actual story. So the Rebbe lists a number of sources here. Ma'aseh Nisim is source number 1. Shevach Pesach, source number 2. Source number 3 is Siddur Maharid. That's the one we're going to look at now. And then is Malbim. And then the Rebbe quotes Aval, but loy mash mekain. It does not seem to imply this way in the Rif and then in other sources. Okay, so the definitive sources the Rebbe gives are 4, and the third one is the Maharid. Who is the Maharid? So let's go down right under the text. There you can see I write there Siddur Maharid, and I write in English. Rabbi Yitzchak Deibers Schneerson lived in 1834-1910, son and successor of Rabbi Hayom Yom Schneerson, 1813-1879, of Chabad Liadi. I didn't make a mistake. I didn't mean Chabad Lubavitch. I meant Chabad Liadi, son of the Tzemach Tzedek. So what's going on here? And this is a little bit of unknown Chabad history, and specifically history of the Rebbe. And I think it's very, very interesting. Which is like this. After the Tzemach Tzedek, who's the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, had many sons. When he had many sons, 7. One of them passed away when he was alive. So 6. One of them, the oldest. Now, when the Tzemach Tzedek passed away, start again. So he had 7 sons. One of them passed away while he was still alive. One of them became a Rebbe in the Chernobyl dynasty, and not a Chabad dynasty. He married into the Chernobyl family, but became a Rebbe in Chernobyl. While his father was alive, the Tzemach Tzedek was a Rebbe in Lubavitch for the Chabad dynasty. His son, Rabbi Yaakov, was in Avruch, another town, part of the Tversky, Hohenstaufen, Chernobyl dynasty. Okay, so now we have how many sons left? 1 passed away, so now we have 5. When the Tzemach Tzedek passed, while Tzemach Tzedek was alive, he instructed all of his sons to teach Chassidus and to guide Chassidim. So even while Tzemach Tzedek was alive, different Chassidim were attracted to different sons of the Tzemach Tzedek. So when Tzemach Tzedek passed away, out of the 5, 4 of them became Rebbes themselves. 4 of them became Rebbes. Yeah? I'm missing wrong. The Rebbe Mahrash, the youngest one was in Lubavitch. The Maharil was in Kapust, and Chaim Shneer Zalman was in Liadi. A second, I'm missing one more. The oldest one didn't become Rebbe. Oh, the oldest one didn't become Rebbe. No, 1 passed away. 1 became a Rebbe while still alive. The oldest one chose not to become a Rebbe. That oldest one is the great-great-grandfather of our Rebbe. And what's one missing?
4. The Mahrash is 1, then you have 2, but you're missing
Kapust and Liadi.
You're missing 1.
Something is wrong, but we're missing.
Besides the Rebbe Mahrash, there's 3. So you know 2, we're missing 1.
Chaim Shneer Zalman, the Maril. Something's missing. I don't think there's any. Something's going blank in my head. Anyway, okay. So this son of Chaim Shneer Zalman was essentially for a number of generations in Russia there was the Chabad movement, but various dynasties. There was Chabad Lubavitch, Chabad Liadi, Chabad Kapust, and then Chabad Kapust split up into Chabad Kapust and Chabad Chabad Retzitza and Chabad Babroisk. And then there was Chabad Lubavitch Strashin. And so there's all these different, because basically all of Russia, you're either Misnagid or you're a Chabad Chassid. If you're a Chabad Chassid, it depends on who you belong to, Lubavitch, this one, that one.
Was it all the same?
So, not the same, whatever. They're all broadly speaking Chabad as opposed to the non-Chabad, which had longer Maamorim and stressed the idea of learning about Hashem, not just the Chassidim, which was about song and stories. They had the Chabad style, but it wasn't necessarily Lubavitch. By the time the previous Rebbe came around, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, all the other dynasties had basically come to an end, and everybody came back to previous Rebbe. Now the Rebbe may mention this once, that there once was a time when Chabad was split. And now with my father-in-law, said the Rebbe, they'll all come together. And the Rebbe himself pushed, or he said at least once that he would have wanted to publish all of the Hasidic teachings of the non-Lubavitch Chabad Rebbes, who themselves wrote Maamorim, lengthy Maamorim. It never came to fruition. They were never officially published by the Rebbe's publishing house, but they mentioned that he wanted to, which was a big novelty because in Russia, you were Lubavitch, you didn't read the Maimer from the other one, but everyone wanted to open the whole thing up, and everyone spoke in praise of all the sons of the Tzemach Tzedek. They were all Admors, they were all Rebbes. The Rebbe writes about them in Hayom Yom, in the introduction to Hayom Yom. The Rebbe gives a biography. The Rebbe writes about them. So the Rebbe, it seemed, wanted to, at least on a historical perspective and on a Torah perspective, to bring them back in. And this, the Mahdi, Rabbi Yitzchak Doiber of Liadi, is on one of these other dynasties. And the Rebbe is quoting from his Hasidic commentary to the Seder. So I could not find it. What I found was thanks to Rabbi Levin, who puts in his footnotes of, Rabbi Levin published a version of the Rebbe's Haggadah, and in the footnotes he quotes all the places that Rebbe cites to. So in there he cites the following text, and look in the picture. Yeah? So we're clear on the context there?
He's the third one.
Sorry? No, but he's a son of the Chaim Shnei Zalman.
Oh, the son.
He's a son of Reb Chaim Shnei Zalman of Liadi. Okay. Dibra HaMaskal tells Tafnun Aleph, the picture there in the middle of page, what page is it? Middle page 8. Dibra HaMaskal, look at the Maimer in the Seder of the Maharid, Rabbi Yitzchak Doiber of Liadi. The Maimer which begins with the words, Inyan Mitzvah Lenu L'Saper B'Tzis Mitzrayim. The idea, what's the spiritual Hasidic idea of retelling the story of the Exodus? So says the Maharid there in the parentheses. It's sort of we have to understand. Kimaskirin, the fact that we make mention of the Exodus, this is every day and every night. This is our question, right? Avol lisho b'lashon shaila, to ask in the form of asking, in form of a question. Gam l'saper b'ribuy, as well as to relate the story at length. Zeu davke b'lil Pesach. This is specifically in the night of the Seder. V'loy maskirin zechira ba'alma, and not just a random mention. So, which answers did you just see in this text? How many answers do you see here?
The one that you have to, what's it called again?
He says here.
Speaking to someone else. Yeah.
Oh, he says you're asking and to tell the story for the. But where does the Rebbe quote him as a source? In reason number 2. Reason number 2, which is to tell the story rather than to make mention. How come the Rebbe doesn't quote this source also in the next text, which says the difference between asking someone else and not? Follow?
Yeah.
Follow my question? Follow what I'm asking or not? Look at the table. Look at the table. Look at the table on bottom page 3. I'm referring back to that table. Yeah? Table on page 3.
So it's worded for both of them.
Yeah? Exactly. In page 3 on the table, reason number 2 is that mention daily versus full story. And reason number 3 is saying the story alone versus someone asking and you answer. How many answers did Rabbi make mention of? Let's read the text again. But lisho b'lashon shaila, to ask in the form of question. Gam l'saper b'ribuy, as well as to tell the story at length. This is dafka another Seder, which means the Mardit seems to be giving 2 of the answers. Number 1, question, answer. Number 2, at length. But the Rebbe only quotes it as a source in reason number 2, where it says to say the full story, rather than quoting him again in reason number 3, which you have to follow. So perhaps the answer will come when we examine the sources of number 3. So let's go to page. Yeah, you need much more time. Let's look at page. Okay, let's look at page page number 9. Yeah, the next page. So we're getting now to reason number 3 and the sources there. So reason number 3 was Yesh Mefarshim, right? This is the one where the Rebbe introduces it by saying there are commentaries that say that on Pesach Noisif we add, in addition to telling the story, you also have to have Shetzarach Lemar must be B'derech Tshuva in a way of question, Leben to a son, La'achar to another. That's what the Rebbe said, right? Okay, so this is number 3, to ask someone else, to have to relate the story to someone else in an answer form. So parentheses, the Rebbe gives source number 1, Minchas Chinuch. Here's what the Rebbe says it without saying the A. He doesn't say see the Minchas Chinuch. He just says Minchas Chinuch, because the Minchas Chinuch definitively gives this answer. Right. Number 2, Shevach HaPesach, source number 2. Then source number 3 is not a direct source, but V'chein Mashma, and so is implied, Ksas, a little bit, the Sefer HaChinuch, in a book called Sefer HaChinuch. I quote the Sefer HaChinuch in the next page, and I'll urge you to have a look at it later, and read the text on page 9 later, and tell me why the Rebbe writes, not that it's a straight out source, but it seems implied maybe. Right, that's what the Rebbe says here, yeah? You see? Yeah. Then he says, investigate into the Rosh. This is the source I was referring to earlier where the source is ambiguous. Yeah? So he says, ayin, look deeply.
So he starts at the more definitive.
Definitive. So definitive is Minchas Chinuch and Shevach HaPesach. Yeah, implied somewhat by the Chinuch. And then investigate this Rosh because it's kind of not clear. Then he goes to the sources that counter. Avo berif, button the Rif, Rashba and the Rashba, and the Rambam, and Shulchan Aruch Rabbeinu, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and oid others, loy mashmakain. It doesn't seem like this way. Meaning, the Rebbe says the Rebbe, the Rif, Rashba, Rambam, which we're not going to look up. The Alter Rebbe we will look at. The Alter Rebbe seems to say, you're not biblically mandated to answer to someone else. Yeah? We'll look up the Alter Rebbe in a moment. V'ulai. Okay, before we go to the rest of the paragraph and unpack that, let's go down to the Alter Rebbe. So go to page 10.
So the Alter Rebbe is refuting the distinction number 3.
Yeah, seems so.
Straight up.
It seems, which is funny, right? Because I've been arguing the whole time that the Rebbe is maintaining that all these things are true and are definitive. And here the Rebbe puts in this parentheses that it seems not the Rebbe that he disagrees with this distinction.
That's why he didn't bring Margaret.
But when we investigate the story,
that's why he didn't bring it. Because the Alter Rebbe holds the other way. That's why he didn't bring it.
Let's see. Let's see, because I think there's more here to it. Let's see. So, page number 9, page 11. I'm sorry, page 11. Go to page 11. I'm sorry. Yeah, page number 9 is the chinuch. Where if you read it, that page number 9 is a source where the Rebbe says it seems implied that you need to ask and answer, but it doesn't say straight out that it's a source. So read number 9 later and tell me why you think it's only implied but not straight out a source. Okay, so source number 10 is, on page number 11, I'm sorry, is the Alter Rebbe. So the Rebbe doesn't say where to look up in the Alter Rebbe. He just says it's not implied by the Alter Rebbe. Doesn't say where to look. So go through the entire Alter Rebbe's Code of Jewish Law and find out why it's not like that. Okay, so I'm not such a scholar, but at least some of the sources I'm able to pull up and see what we come up with. So page 11 is first number 1 like this. Before the Alter Rebbe writes the laws of Pesach, he does something that those who learn Rambam are familiar with. Before the Rambam begins any set of laws, he lists the mitzvahs that are going to be covered in these laws. Right? That's what the Rambam does. The Alter Rebbe does not do that for all of the laws, but he does do it for the laws of Pesach. The history of the Alter Rebbe's code and why he does that, not for now. But this is the fact. Before the laws of Pesach, he lists all the mitzvahs that are going to be covered. So let's see. How does he define the mitzvah to retell the story? Right? So you can see here there's Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, and there's English there as well. Zayin, Ches, 8 mitzvahs. So what's mitzvah number Ches, or number 8? L'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim, to tell the story of the Exodus, on that day. Biblically speaking, what's the definition of the mitzvah? Tell the story. Doesn't say Lanos l'shailos haben doesn't say to respond to the child's question. Doesn't say that's the mitzvah.
Who are you going to speak to? It doesn't have to mean
Talk to yourself.
To relate.
If you're alone,
talk to yourself.
if you're alone, 1 second. We're gonna see even more in a second. We'll see even more in a second. But for now, tell the story to the air. You daven to who? To Hashem. You say Shema. Who are you talking to?
The word suffer doesn't.
Who are you talking to when you say Shema Yisrael?
Why you're saying to yourself?
Yourself. Hear, O Israel. Listen, Jew. Right? So,
No, it doesn't say sit for it. Here, suffer.
Tell the story.
You say stories to other people.
A person is sitting
Don't
alone.
Say stories to
A
yourself.
person is sitting alone can't fulfill the mitzvah.
You could talk it.
Think the Robert.
The word siddur is more to other people. In the word,
So let's stop with Mitzvah. This seems to be and this is what Rabbi Levin quotes here. This text, he tells us to look in that text. The Alter Rebbe writes that the definition of the mitzvah is to tell the story. It doesn't say a definition is to respond to a question. But it's not as if the Alter Rebbe completely leaves out this idea of telling others. In fact, go to the actual Code of Jewish Law on page number. Let's go to number 12. We'll do it a little quickly because there's 3 sources here. After drinking the first, page 12 at the bottom in English. After drinking the first cup of wine, each and every person must eat a small amount of vegetables and after dipping them, i.e., one should dip his vegetable in vinegar, salt water, or other dips. This is referring to karpas, step number 2 in the Seder, after Kiddush, right? If he does not have such dips, he should dip them in charoses. We do salt water, that's our custom, right? Why did the sages ordain this practice? To arouse the children's wonderment. They will see the deviation from ordinary practice. The vegetables are being eaten are being eaten after being dipped, even though throughout the year vegetables are not eaten before the meal, and they will question this deviation from the norm. Their questions are desirable because it is a mitzvah for the parent to relate the Haggadah as a response to the question asked from him by a child. As the verse says, when your child will ask you, and you shall tell your child. So, what?
It's a setup.
you see.
So, but the Rebbe wrote over here that from the Alter Rebbe it seems that he doesn't agree with this answer.
That's if kids are there.
Huh?
Yeah, no children.
Oh, so let's keep on going.
If they're there.
So let's keep on going. Yes, you guys are right. Let's keep on going. So now we're skipping a couple of halachas. What we just read was in chapter 473, subsection 14. Now let's go to chapter 473, subsection 40. Says the Alter Rebbe in English, again, bottom of page 13. Even though it is not necessary to hold a cup of wine in one's hand until one reaches the passage beginning lefichach, as will be explained later, it is nevertheless necessary to pour the second cup immediately after the children finish saying the question, before beginning the recitation of the Haggadah. Even though you're not going to pick up the Haggadah, even though you're not going to pick up the cup, so you've done the Haggadah, you still got to fill it up now. In this way, the children will be motivated to ask, why are you drinking a second cup of wine before the meal? For it is not customary to drink this manner on all of the days of the year. Right. Every other day of the year, every Yom Tif, we only drink 1 cup before the meal, Kiddush. Now you're drinking the second one? What's going on? In this manner, the children will be motivated to ask the other questions, including the Mahrash. In this way, one will have his children fulfill the charge implied by the verse, when in the future your children will ask you, saying, what are these testimonies, statutes, and judges? And you shall tell your child, we were slaves. Now, if the child lacks level of understanding, to ask, and his father is obligated to teach him to ask Mahrash. If the child lacks a level of understanding to ask, then his father is obligated to teach him to ask Mahrash. If a person does not have a child, his wife is obligated to ask him. If the person does not have a wife, he should ask himself. Even if 2 Torah scholars who are learned in the laws of Pesach and are sharing the Seder together, one should ask the other. Afterwards, they both begin reading Avodah Mayinu. It is not necessary for the second scholar to ask the first in return Mahrash. Similarly, if one's child or wife asks the questions before conducting the Seder, he need not ask Mahrash. Instead, he should begin Avodah Mayinu. So what do we see here? There is idea of asking. But there's idea of asking what? Alone. Asking alone is not the same thing as asking someone else. Let's go back to our chart. Let's go back to our chart on page 3. What is answer number 3? It's not just a question of ask or answer. What is it? Alone or not? According to the Alter Rebbe, even though asking might be part of the mitzvah, but it doesn't have to be someone else. Answer number 3, so now we really have another distinction, which is there's telling the story, there's asking an answer, and then there's asking someone else. Right? That's what we're finding out here. Answer number 3 is citing to sources who specifically say that what's the obligation? To ask someone else. And that's not implied by the Alter Rebbe. Because the Alter Rebbe says, if you're not with someone else, do it yourself, ask yourself. So where would the Alter Rebbe then stand? That you should be asking, but not someone else, yourself. So in which of the 6 answers does he fall into?
Fall into number 2.
Number 2 he would fall into. In other words, the definition of telling the story is ask and answer, even if it's just yourself. And for that purpose, the Rebbe quotes the Mahrash. Look at the text of the Mahrash again. Let's go back to page. This is so beautiful. It's like fun. It's so amazing. Go to page 8. Page 8, look at the text very carefully from the Mahrash. What did he say? Aval bat lisho b'loshen shaila, to ask in a way of asking. Did he say to ask someone else? No. He said ask, as well as to tell the story at length. Meaning, ask and answer and tell the story at length. Or let me rephrase that. Asking and answering is the way in which you tell the story at length. And that's in 2, not in 3. Now you know why the Rebbe doesn't quote Mahrash in number 3. Because number 3 is not just about asking, answering. It's about asking someone else specifically. And asking someone else is not the Alter Rebbe's opinion, even though it's best to ask someone else. But the mitzvah is not defined by asking someone else. The mitzvah might be defined by asking yourself. And asking yourself is included in number 2. That's the way to tell the story at length.
Or by
Beautiful. And more to the proof, if you want to go even further. Let's go to the very last page. What do you want to say? Sorry.
saying that like you said, like we have to like set up the actions to engage the questions.
That's right. Even if no one else is there. Because the obligation of telling the story really is to ask and to answer. That's the way you tell a story.
But we all say it. He said,
Gewaldig.
He asks one Torah scholar, the other one doesn't have to do it. They all have to do it at the end.
As long as there's ask and answering happening. Okay, the Chabad custom is that even after the children or the wife asks, the reader repeats the questions himself. That's not by halacha. That's a Chabad custom. By halacha is the children ask and the person answers. That's it. As long as there's question answer happen. In other words, maybe we can argue like this. True storytelling is dialogue.
Right.
A good novel is dialogue. A good story is dialogue. So if no one else is there, ask and answer yourself. But that's still all that's all still included in answer number 2, not in answer number 3, which is why the Mahrash is quoted there. Because he says, Lisha b'loshen shaila, doesn't say Lishal acher, doesn't say to ask someone else.
That inferred, though.
To me, it seems directly clear.
Totally inferred, yeah?
He doesn't, read the text.
It's like asking, like,
He doesn't say, Aval lahashav l'shaila. He doesn't say, Aval lahashav b'shaila. Doesn't say, but to answer a question. He says, Lishal b'loshen shaila, to ask in a way of question. Meaning, it's the asking, not the answering. It's the same person doing the answering and the responding. That's why it's all number 2, not number 3. And this explains why the Alter Rebbe is not in number 3, he is in number 2. So which means, number 3, which is to ask someone else, even if it's not. And
Straight up, he should ask himself.
that's not what the Rebbe says, right? Which is why the Rebbe says that number 3 is not implied by the Alter Rebbe. Which means like this, even though number 3 is not implied by the Alter Rebbe directly, because the Alter Rebbe does not say to have another, but we're not discounting number 3 completely. We're absorbing it into number 2 by saying that answer and question have to be there. And I'll bring you more proof. This is Rebbe's opinion. And this comes on my text here it's page 16, but I think it's for you, it's page 15. The last page, bottom line. So this is from a talk of the Rebbe, transcribed and edited and published in Sichos, which is the Rebbe's collected talks that are edited. The Rebbe's magnum opus is the 39 volumes of Sichos. These are 39 volumes of selected talks. I mentioned this in my introduction that the Rebbe didn't write a lot. The Rebbe spoke prolifically, but didn't write so much. One of the few things the Rebbe wrote as a full book is this Haggadah that we're studying, right? Which you can see is very dense. But the Rebbe's speaking is much more elaborate, very prolific. The Rebbe would elaborate on a question for a good 25 minutes, go on about a question, and then spend 30 minutes changing your mind and then coming to the answer at the end. The Rebbe would really take you on a journey, talk about storytelling and question answer. The Rebbe did that by Fabrengens. And if you get into it, the Rebbe would take a Gemara, take you all the way through it, question, answer. It's beautiful to go through it. So though those talks are published just as transcripts without being edited. But then the editors the Rebbe had appointed editors who would select certain talks, submit it to the Rebbe in essay form, the Rebbe would edit them, and then they'd be published. That's called Lakutei Sichos, selected talks. That's the Rebbe's real magnum opus, is these 39 volumes. So in there, on one of these talks for Pesach, one of the more famous ones, just parenthetically, I'm thinking about this, the Haggadah is probably one of the most worked over books by the Rebbe. Not just in this commentary, which we have here, which the Rebbe amended a number of times, and I want to get to one emendation in a moment to tie up what we're learning here. But in the Rebbe's talks throughout the years, the Rebbe went through the Haggadah numerous times. In fact, in the early years, get this, after the Farbrengen was over, at 2, 3 in the morning, they would come down to in the early years, they would come down meaning they would conduct the Seder at his father-in-law and his mother-in-law's apartment. His father-in-law had passed, he was a Rebbe, but his mother-in-law would conduct the Seder, would host the Seder, and he would have the Seder with his wife and the family upstairs in 770 at the previous Rebbe's apartment. That was his mother-in-law's apartment. After the Haggadah, after the Seder, 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're not allowed to eat and drink anymore, right? You're not allowed to eat and drink after the Seder. They would come down, sit in the Zal, in the study hall, and deliver a Farbrengen, in which they would explain passages of the Haggadah. And this is besides the fact that on random Shabbosim, they would speak about the Haggadah. Sometimes even on Parshas Boy, like our Parshas, Parshas Boy, Va'eda, the Parshas in the Torah that discuss the Exodus, they would sometimes talk about Pesach then also, or the Haggadah. So the Haggadah is perhaps, maybe Iger Satshuva from the Alter Rebbe is another one. But this is for sure one of the Rebbe's top books that he investigated and commented on. Anyway, so one of the Rebbe's famous talks on the night of the Seder, the Rebbe discusses this idea that we see in both the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, that it's not simply that a person should conduct himself in freedom, but lahares atzmai. He has to show himself as being free, meaning to say it's important that he engage the viewer, not just that he behave freely, but that this behavior has to be, has to be exhibited and has to be visualized by another.
Somebody else.
Yeah, leaning, sorry?
So you need somebody else.
Oh, so there, in that talk, the Rebbe cites to this notion. And in the footnotes actually tells us to look up this Haggadah. So let's see. On the bottom right-hand column of the last page there. Ches. One of the additional elements of the mitzvah to relay the story on the night of the 15th, that goes beyond the obligation to remember the mitzvah Exodus daily. One of the additions is, right, we know already of 6. God was telling us here, one of them, who is the Haggadah lebincha. The verse says, relate to your child. Hainu, which this means to say, this is to your point, Jacob, it's maspik. It's not enough that he make mention of the story to himself. He has to tell the story to another, to his son, or to another. And in footnote 26 there, it tells us to look up here. Yeah? So they were talking in this lecture here and saying one of the differences between the obligation to tell the story of the Exodus and the night of the Seder that goes beyond the obligation to make mention of the Exodus every day is the fact that you need someone else, one of them. Now let's see the parentheses on top of the left-hand column. And here comes the clincher. This is the reason, this is the reason why the halacha tells us, if a person doesn't have a child, or Isha doesn't have a wife, this is what we learned from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch 2 minutes ago. If he doesn't have a son or a wife to ask of him, who shoyel la'atzmoi, he should ask himself. Why? Because the obligations of the night of the Seder, that to relay the story of the Exodus, to your point, Yossi, to another, that's what telling a story is. Therefore, if he has no one to ask of him, he's got to ask himself. Because by the fact that he asks himself, he becomes an other to himself. So, Levi, why are we doing this whole Seder night? Well, Levi, we went out of Egypt. He becomes an other to himself.
Left shoulder.
Yeah. And And by responding to the question and telling to the quote other that's within himself, he fulfills the obligation to relay the story.
This goes for number 3.
So, but the Rebbe said, so here the Rebbe says, here the Rebbe quotes the Alter Rebbe and says that telling it to another is the mitzvah according to the Alter Rebbe. But over here the Rebbe says in number 3 that the Alter Rebbe is not like this. That's what the Rebbe writes. In number 3, go back to, what page was it? Right? Remember the Rebbe said, page number 9. Page number 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Aval but berif, Rashba, Rambam, and Shulchan Aruch Rabbeinu loy mashma kain. It doesn't seem this way. So in the Sichos, that was telling us that the Alter Rebbe is of the view that you have to have an other. But in the Seder, in Haggadah, which the Rebbe cites to in that Sichos, in that talk, he says the Alter Rebbe says not to have another. That's why I'm making the argument that this idea of treating yourself like an other, is incorporated in proper storytelling of number 2, which is why the Rebbe quotes the Mahrash, where the Mahrash says lisha b'lashon shayla, to ask in a way of asking. Other are not irrelevant, but ask, and that's the proper way to tell a story. That's number 2, which means therefore we could maintain all 6 answers. Just that answer number 3 for the Alter Rebbe won't be an other; it'll be yourself, which is really incorporated in answer number 2. And another proof to my point, and we'll close with that. We clear so far? Yeah?
It doesn't really hurl a 3.
Sorry?
Number 3 is not.
So number 3 is yesh befarshim. That's right. And this adds what exactly? This adds what the Rebbe says yesh befarshim, because all the other ones, even though there are people who argue, I, as the Rebbe maybe is saying, maintain that this is correct. When it comes to this third one, there are some commentaries like that, but the Alter Rebbe is not fully there, right? Which is why he says yesh befarshim maybe. Yeah. Very, very good. So now I'm going to add. Now let's look. One more thing. We'll conclude with this. Another proof to my point. So let's continue. After it says le'mashki, in the middle of page, what page is it? 9, where you have the dash in the middle of the line there. Yeah. After the dash there. Yeah. So the Rebbe first says that first to give the sources for the fact that you have to have an other. Then the Rebbe says that in the Rif, Rashba, Rambam, and Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't seem to imply that way, because as we learned, according to Alter Rebbe, you don't need an other, but at least you have to talk to yourself. But you don't need an other. Then the Rebbe says like this: V'ulai, perhaps Efshar Leimer might suggest shetaloi, this dispute as to whether or not you have to have an other is dependent b'shtei hagertsois, in 2 different variants of an original Mishnaic era text. There's 2 variations, the same text of the Mishnaic era. The Mechilta Shehevi b'Sefer Mitzvah Rambam. In the Rambam's Mechilta, it says, Kosav it writes, V'gadu to lebincha, tell your child, Afal pish eina shelecha, even if he doesn't ask you. Ein li ela b'zman sheish leben. How do I know that you have to have a child present? Maybe I could tell others. Etc. So one version of the Mishnah text only discusses him and his child, him and another. But there's got to be an other. That's one version of this Mishnah text. Yeah. But in the Mechilta of the Rashbi, another version of that same text, it says, between he and himself, and and between him and others. So one version says between him and himself, between him and his child, or between him and another. But an other you have to have. The other text says between himself, right? So here you have the source of the dispute. Now look at the 2 stars in the bottom, under the line there. Many years later, the Rebbe added the following 2 lines to the Haggadah. And to the best of my knowledge, these 2 lines were added, look at the year, after the talk came out. To the best of my knowledge, which means this is included the information of the talk as well. Right? Where's the talk? Here. This is published in, this is from a talk of the year 1975, and to the best of my knowledge, this emendation is 1980, if I'm not mistaken. So what did they write in the emendation? In this version, the version which says between you and yourself and between you and others. Sarach il gadol. If you don't have my explanation, says the Rebbe, you'll be presented with the following serious problem. The bottom of page 9. If this text already says that between you and yourself you can do it, it's extraneous to say between you and another. If you're doing it between you and yourself, certainly you can do it between you and another. When it comes to the other text says between you and your son, not only between you and your son, but between you and another. So it goes from the obvious to the less obvious. But in this text, it goes the reverse. First, it brings the less obvious, yourself, and then brings the more obvious, which is another. What's going on? But based on what I'm telling you, you have the answer. How? How do you have the answer? Huh? How do you answer?
Do it yourself.
Because now we're learning. Oh, what?
No, the behest will be not that's the more thing that you have to be.
Because between him and himself is the essential mitzvah. But it's best to do it if you have another. But moreover like this. The definition of you and yourself is to treat yourself as another.
The optimal way is to
But to have another for sure. But even the treating yourself is as if you're another. Which is why it's not extraneous to say. But this only works out once you have the Rebbe's Chiddush, which the Rebbe says, thanks to my connection, now you have the answer to why it says the double expression, me and myself, and then me and another, which seems to be redundant.
So in that case, it preserves number 3.
Following? Huh?
Preserves number 3.
So even though we're discounting number 3 because it's only yesh befarshim, it's only some, and we're discounting it, not discounting it, but the Alter Rebbe doesn't reject it because the Alter Rebbe doesn't require an other. But still somewhat you have to have an other, at least an other of yourself. And that would be the proper way to fulfill number 2 of telling the story properly. So we only unpacked number 3. There's still number 1, number 2, number 4, number 5, and number 6 to unpack. Just to give you an idea of how much is packed into these dense little paragraphs that you don't even see. Maybe another day, maybe one morning at the shir, we'll go through the other ones that we missed out tonight. Okay. Sorry? Yeah. Next week, I hope to go to another sample. Like I mentioned, we'll do maybe something on the linguistic end, on the history, something of that nature. Wow. Okay, you have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope you had I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed preparing this and relaying this. So, good night, Eden.
Why is it so repeated? That's exactly what's